Thinking he was just an old farmer, they sneaked into his land and killed his dog. What they didn't know was that the man they mocked used to be a Marine sniper, and now he's taking aim. In Mexico, a young boy named Miguel lives with his mother, Rosa. One warm afternoon, as she prepares food in their small home, Rosa receives a sudden call from her brother, Carlos. He explains that a powerful cartel was after him because he stole a large sum of their money. Desperate and terrified, he pleads with her to find the cash that he hid for her and to flee Mexico before it's too late. Moments after the call ends, the cartel captures Carlos. Their ruthless leader, Mauricio, searches through Carlos's phone and notices Rosa's name among the recent contacts. That alone was enough for him to confirm that she knows something, and without hesitation or mercy, they execute Carlos. Meanwhile, across the border in Arizona, a retired Marine named Jim spends his days working the dry land near the U.S.-Mexico border. He keeps a close eye on his property and frequently alerts Border Patrol whenever he spots anyone crossing legally. One day, while tending to his cattle, Jim notices a small group of people sneaking across the desert and immediately reports it. Out of curiosity, he follows them from a distance and discovers one man left behind with a badly injured leg. The others, unable to carry him, have abandoned him to his fate. Jim radios the man's location to Border Patrol, then quietly returns home. Back at his ranch, Jim's problems continue to pile up. A bank representative reminds him of the payments he still owes. Since he hasn't paid in 6 months, the banker warns that his property will soon be put up for auction. Jim has been struggling financially ever since his wife's long illness drained his savings and left him buried in debt. Now the bank threatens to seize his home unless he can come up with the money. Jim pleads for more time, explaining that he just needs a chance to get back on his feet. The man finally tells him that he has 90 days to figure something out, or they're going to come and take away his home. Later, Jim sets out to look for work, but the man at the employment office tells him the position isn't suited for someone his age. Still, he promises to try and find another job that might fit him better next month. Refusing to give up, Jim drives to a local cattle buyer, hoping to sell a few animals he still owns. The offer he receives is discouragingly low, barely enough to cover a fraction of his debt. Even selling everything wouldn't fix his situation, and exhausted and disheartened, Jim ends his long day at a nearby bar, hoping that a drink or two might ease the constant weight pressing on his mind. The bartender, concerned by his tired expression, calls his stepdaughter Sarah, who works for Border Patrol, to let her know something might be wrong with him. Sarah soon arrives and sits beside him, and they talk quietly for a while, and Jim finally admits that he's been drowning in debt and is on the verge of losing his home. As the night goes on, he orders another round of drinks, but Sarah stops him, and she drives him back to his ranch, making sure he gets home safely. Meanwhile, Rosa and Miguel continue fleeing through the countryside. The next day, near the U.S.-Mexico border, they find a narrow gap in the tall steel fence and try to slip through as the cartel closes in on them. Jim happens to be nearby when he notices the pair moving through the opening, and Rosa, desperate and terrified, pleads with him not to report them. Jim, uncertain but cautious, tells her to seek help from the Border Patrol and begins to make a call to report their location. In a while, several armed men led by Mauricio arrive, demanding that he hand the two over. Realizing the danger that they were in, Jim makes a quick decision to protect them instead. Gunfire breaks out almost immediately, and Jim manages to shoot one of the attackers and speeds away in his truck with Rosa and Miguel, while Mauricio and his men chase after them across the desert. During the chase, Mauricio climbs onto Jim's truck, but Jim manages to throw him off before he can take control. When Mauricio discovers that the man Jim shot was his own brother, his rage grows even stronger. The mission stops being about recovering the stolen money at this point and becomes something personal. Now Mauricio's goal is not only to find Miguel, but also to take revenge for his brother's death. As they flee, Jim realizes that Rosa had been hit by a bullet. She was badly wounded, her breathing uneven, and her voice weak. With her remaining strength, she hands Jim a small folded note and an address in Chicago explaining that it belongs to her relatives. She begs him to take Miguel there and warns that if the cartel finds the boy, they will kill him. And moments later, she passes away. Later, police and paramedics arrive at the scene. Sarah, now aware of what happened, tells Jim that Miguel will stay at the station overnight and be placed in foster care the following day. The next morning, Jim wakes up in his truck near the border checkpoint with his dog, Jackson, lying beside him. He notices a familiar vehicle parked nearby, the same one the cartel used the previous day. Inside his truck, he finds a bag Rosa left behind and opens it to discover it filled with cash. As he looks at the blood-stained fabric, memories of Rosa dying beside him return in sharp detail. The money no longer feels like a way out of his problems, and it now represents her final wish, a duty that he cannot ignore. Remembering her last plea, he starts his engine and drives back to find Miguel. Jim hurries to the border station to check on the boy. When he arrives, an officer informs him that Miguel was about to be handed over to his supposed relatives in Mexico, but something felt wrong. Looking through the window, Jim immediately recognizes the men outside. Keeping calm, he asks the officer for a few minutes to speak with Miguel alone. The officer agrees and allows him inside. Once in the the room, Jim acts quickly. He quietly leads Miguel down the hallway, slipping out a side door without drawing attention. Together, they disappear into the sunlight, beginning their escape once more. Outside, Mauricio stands silently in the parking lot, watching as Jim's truck disappears into the distance with the boy. His expression hardens with anger, and in that moment, he decides what must be done. He will cross into the United States, track them down, and kill them both. Back in Arizona, Jim stops briefly at his ranch. He gathers a few clothes, weapons, and what little cash he has left, and then prepares to leave. When he returns to his vehicle, he realizes that Miguel has run off. At the same time, Mauricio and his men begin crossing the border illegally. The border officer who spots them hesitates, recognizing immediately that these men are cartel enforcers. Fearful for his life, the officer allows them to pass without resistance. Unfortunately, Jim finds Miguel not far from the ranch and warns him that if those men catch him, they will kill him without mercy. Together, they set off towards Chicago. As they drive, Jim tells Miguel that he is taking him to Chicago, but the boy remains silent. Jim assumes Miguel cannot understand him. Meanwhile, after crossing into the United States, Mauricio drives directly to Jim's property. He breaks into the house and searches every room until he finds several credit card receipts and an old Marine Corps badge. The discovery reveals everything he needed to know. Jim was not just a rancher, but a trained Marine, which makes him a far more dangerous opponent. Mauricio pockets the badge and orders his men to burn the house down. Moments later, the property is engulfed in flames. Jim stops at a gas station to refuel and buys a paper map to help navigate toward Chicago. Using the credit card receipts, Mauricio begins coordinating with cartel members already working inside the United States. Jim later calls Sarah and learns that his ranch had been destroyed by the cartel. Furious, he argues out loud in the car until Miguel quietly responds in English. Jim was surprised, realizing that the boy understood him all along. Miguel admits that he doesn't want to be there, and Jim tells him that he's doing what is best and explains that they are heading to his family in Chicago. However, the credit card payment Jim made at the gas station gives away his location. Mauricio receives the alert within minutes and races there with his men. When they arrive, Mauricio enters calmly and questions the cashier about where Jim went. When she refuses to help, claiming she doesn't know anything, without hesitation, Mauricio draws his gun and shoots her before leaving. After reviewing the gas station security footage, Mauricio discovers that Jim is traveling east. Later, Jim's truck breaks down and he takes it to a nearby garage. The mechanic apologizes, saying that they're closed for the day. With nowhere else to go, Jim takes Miguel to a small diner nearby. For the first time, they truly talk. They introduce themselves properly, and Jim asks why those men were after him. Miguel explains that his uncle got into some serious trouble with the cartel, and now they're being hunted because of him. When Jim asks about his father, Miguel quietly says that he died before he was born. That night, they end up sleeping inside Jim's truck. The next morning, Jim wakes up and finds that Miguel and Jackson were gone. A moment of panic sets in before he sees them returning with groceries Miguel had bought nearby. Relieved, Jim gets his truck repaired, and they continue their journey. Jim and Miguel drive using the map he bought earlier, and Mauricio and his men are soon alerted to Jim's current location after he pays for the car repair, and they head in that direction. On the road, Jim and Miguel begin growing closer, talking about Jim's own trip to Chicago when he was young. Their moment of calm is interrupted when a police car appears behind them, flashing its lights and signaling for them to pull over. The officer approaches and asks for Jim's identification. Jim remains composed, explaining that he's carrying a legally registered firearm and can show the paperwork to prove it. The officer, however, appears suspicious and takes the gun, saying he also wants to question the boy in the vehicle. Uneasy but cooperative, Jim agrees and follows the officer toward the patrol car. Once inside, Jim notices the officer speaking quietly into his phone, trying not to be overheard. It becomes clear at this point that this is not a normal traffic stop. Jim realizes the man is stalling for time, likely coordinating with the cartel. He asks the officer how much he was being paid to betray his badge, and when the officer pulls out his gun, Jackson jumps at him, and together they fight him off. Without hesitation, Jim knocks the officer unconscious and runs back to the truck and drives away before the cartel arrive. A short while later, Mauricio and his men reach the scene. They find the officer barely conscious and demand to know where Jim went, but he couldn't give them an answer. In frustration, Mauricio shoots him dead. While searching the area, he finds Jim's roadmap and takes it with him. From a distance, Jim and Miguel watch everything unfold. Later, Jim stops at a gun shop to buy a shotgun. He calls Sarah and learns that the person he shot was Mauricio's brother. Sarah urges him to bring the boy back, and Jim reluctantly agrees. As night falls, he and Miguel check into a small motel to rest. During the evening, they talk more and begin to understand each other better. Miguel mentions that when they get to Chicago, the first thing he wants to do is eat a hot dog. A few hours later, Jim wakes and takes Jackson outside for air. The moment he steps onto the cool night air, he spots Mauricio and his men nearby. Jim hurries back to the room, quietly wakes Miguel, and calls the police to report a false robbery. Hoping to draw attention away, he helps the boy climb out the window, and they move through the darkness into the nearby bushes. Moments later, the cartel burst into the motel room, finding it empty. Furious, Mauricio shouts into the night, promising to find Jim. Jim tells Miguel to wait in the truck while he goes back for Jackson. But by the time he returns, it was too late. Jackson, loyal as ever, has faced Mauricio head-on, barking to protect his owner. But Mauricio raises his gun and kills him without hesitation. The gunfire echoes throughout the night. The next morning, Jim and Miguel bury the dog in a quiet patch of land near the motel, marking the spot with a few stones. Later, Miguel confronts Jim after seeing the money in the car, accusing him of helping only for that reason. Hurt, Jim denies it, but Miguel storms off. Soon after, the boy returns and they both apologize before continuing their journey. Not long after, they stop at a small church and Miguel kneels at the altar, murmuring a prayer for his mother while Jim stands silently behind him. When the priest approaches and gently asks if Miguel is his grandson, Jim softly answers that he is not, explaining that he promised the boy's mother he would keep him safe. Later, Jim calls Sarah to tell her what was happening. She pleads with him to hand Miguel over to the authorities, warning that things are becoming far too dangerous. But Jim refuses. He made a promise to Rosa, and he intends to keep it no matter what the cost might be. As Jim and Miguel continue toward Chicago, Mauricio and his men keep searching for any clue that might reveal their location. Eventually, they find Jim's map in their car. On it, a red circle is drawn around Chicago, confirming their destination. Mauricio immediately contacts cartel members already based in the city, ordering them to be ready when Jim and the boy arrive. Sometime later, Miguel finds Jim practicing with his rifle. Curious, he joins him, and Jim begins teaching him how to aim and shoot accurately, as well as take apart and reassemble the weapon. Miguel tells him that when he grows up, he plans to kill those men for what they did. Jim looks at him firmly and tells him that there is nothing exciting or noble about killing another person. He reminds him that his mother gave her life so that he could have a better one. That night, Jim and Miguel take shelter beneath an old overpass. To stay warm, they light a small fire, feeding it with bundles of cartel money. The cash no longer matters to them, but survival does. By the next morning, they finally reach the outskirts of Chicago. While driving along a highway, Jim notices two suspicious men watching from an overpass above. He recognizes the danger immediately, and to protect Miguel, he turns off the main road and drives into the countryside, hoping to draw their pursuers away from the city. The cartel cars close in fast, and one vehicle pulls up beside them. Jim swerves sharply, sending it crashing into the trees. He realizes the truck's radiator is failing, but he keeps driving until they reach a remote open area and then stops the vehicle. Drawing on his military experience, Jim takes up a position with his rifle, steadies his breath, and fires. His shot hits the driver of Mauricio's car, flipping it off the road. The vehicle crashes violently, leaving only Mauricio and two of his men crawling from the wreck. One of the cartel men opens fire toward Jim's position, and Jim grabs Miguel and pulls him along as they run toward an abandoned farmhouse nearby. They slip into a dusty old shed where Jim positions himself near a cracked window. He tells Miguel that if anything happens to him, he must run as fast and as far as possible through the broken glass. Jim spots one of the cartel men approaching. He steadies his rifle once again, squeezes the trigger, and drops the man instantly. Only two enemies remain. Acting quickly, Jim tells Miguel to stay inside and fire into the air to draw their attention. As the sound of gunfire echoes across the field, Jim moves quietly around to the side of the building. The distraction works, and when one of the other men steps out into the open, Jim steadies his aim and takes the shot, killing him instantly. Now only the leader, Mauricio, remains. Moments later, Mauricio breaks into the shed and grabs Miguel, pressing a gun to the boy's head. He orders Jim to drop his weapon. Jim slowly lowers it, keeping his eyes locked on Mauricio. Then Mauricio shoves the gun into Miguel's trembling hands and orders him to pull the trigger, telling him that he's going to become a soldier like them and kill his first man today. But Miguel, remembering how Jim had showed him to take a gun apart, quickly removes the bullets without Mauricio noticing. When he pulls the trigger, the weapon only clicks. Realizing what happened, Mauricio tries to reassemble it, but in that single moment of distraction, it gives Jim the opening he needed. Jim lunges forward and tackles Mauricio, and the two men fight violently, trading punches and grappling across the floor. During the struggle, Miguel grabs the gun and points it at Mauricio. The man does not plead or beg, and instead he dares the boy to shoot him. Jim sees the anger and pain building in Miguel's eyes and steps in, telling him not to listen and that he should never live with that burden. Jim takes the gun from the boy and fires once, hitting Mauricio in the abdomen. He then tells Miguel to step outside. As Jim raises his weapon again, Mauricio, bleeding and weakened, pulls something from his pocket. It is the Marine badge that he had stolen from Jim's home. Jim takes it back and gives him a final choice: face him or end his own life. Mauricio makes his decision and turns the gun on himself. In a single gunshot echoes through the quiet countryside. With the danger finally over, Jim and Miguel resume their journey. Before long, they reach the address written on Rosa's note. Miguel knocks on the door, and it opens to reveal his aunt and grandmother standing inside. Before the boy can turn around to say goodbye, Jim quietly slips away. Jim boards a bus, clutching his wounded side. He takes a seat near the window, exhales slowly, and closes his eyes. The fight, the promise, and the long long road behind him now seemed to fade away. The bus pulls forward, and Jim rides off in silence, his mission finally complete. And that's how the movie ends. What do you think about Ray? Let us know in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.